I was standing in my hallway, the familiar scent of polished wood and old books filling the air. My fingers worked the knot of my tie, a deep burgundy one that Elizabeth had picked out years ago. She said it brought out the warmth in my eyes. At 67, these little rituals, like choosing a tie or shining my shoes, kept me grounded. They were my way of holding on to the life we'd built together, even though she'd been gone for 4 years now. Cancer took her, slow and cruel, leaving me alone in this colonial-style house in the suburbs of Seattle. Too big for one man, really, but I couldn't bear to let it go. It was all I had left of her. Tonight was Friday, my weekly dinner with my son, Ethan, and his family. I looked forward to these evenings, sitting at their table, hearing my granddaughter Lily's stories about school, her soccer games, her dreams of becoming an artist. Ethan was 40 now, a successful real estate investor, or so I thought. I'd always been proud of him, the way he'd carved out his own path after I helped him through college and his first home purchase. Those dinners were my anchor, a promise I made to Elizabeth to keep our family close. I paused at the hall table, where Elizabeth's picture sat in a silver frame. Her smile was frozen in time, those kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Off to see Ethan and Lily," I whispered to her. "I'll tell you about it when I get back." It was a foolish habit, talking to a photograph, but it felt like she was still here, listening without judgment. I straightened the frame, a ritual, as familiar as breathing. My hand reached for my coat, the wool one I saved for these occasions. It made me feel like I still had a place in the world, like I wasn't just a retired bank manager fading into the background. But as I slipped my arm into the sleeve, my phone buzzed on the table, a sharp, insistent vibration that broke the quiet. I glanced at the screen, expecting a text from Ethan, maybe a request to pick up ice cream for Lily. But the name staring back at me was Michael Sullivan, my lawyer, my friend of 35 years. The message was short, just 5 words, but they hit like a punch to the chest. "Bill, call me now. Urgent. Urgent." Michael wasn't the kind of man to throw that word around lightly. My stomach tightened, a cold knot forming as my mind raced. Was it his health? His wife, Ellen? Something about the estate? My fingers fumbled as I tapped his name and lifted the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice. Then his voice came through, low and steady, but with an edge I didn't recognize. "Bill, are you alone?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice catching. "I was just heading to Ethan's for dinner. What's wrong, Michael? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said, but there was no warmth in his tone, no comfort. "Listen carefully. Are you sitting down?" I sank onto the bench by the door, the coat still half on, my heart thudding against my ribs. "Michael, you're scaring me. Just tell me." He took a breath, the sound crackling over the line. "I've been reviewing your financial documents, the ones we updated last month for your estate plan. I requested full statements from your retirement accounts, your investments, everything." I waited, the silence stretching, heavy with dread. "And Bill." His voice softened, but it carried a weight that made the room feel smaller. "There's a problem, a big one, and it involves Ethan." The world seemed to tilt. Ethan, my son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd trusted. With everything? I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white against the dark wool of my coat. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael's next words were slow, deliberate, each one landing like a stone. "The reports Ethan's been sending you, the ones showing your accounts are stable, they're fake, forged documents. The real statements tell a different story. Your savings, Bill, your life's work, it's almost gone." I couldn't speak. The scent of polished wood faded, replaced by a metallic taste in my mouth. Fear. Disbelief. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. but all I could see was Elizabeth's face in that silver frame, smiling at me across the years. And all I could feel was the ground slipping out from under me. The words hung in the air, heavy and unreal. Almost gone. My life savings, the $2.8 million I'd built over decades of careful planning, of late nights at the bank, of sacrifices Elizabeth and I made to secure our future, nearly vanished. I sat there on the bench, the phone pressed to my ear, my coat still dangling off one shoulder. The hallway, with its familiar creaks and shadows, felt like a stranger's house. "Michael," I said, my voice sounding distant, like it belonged to someone else. "That's impossible. No one can touch those accounts but me." Michael's sigh crackled through the line, heavy with a sorrow that went beyond his role as my lawyer. "That's not true, Bill. There's one other person. The person you gave durable power of attorney to, back when Elizabeth was in the hospital. When things got so bad you couldn't manage it all." He didn't need to say the name. I knew it before he spoke. "It's Ethan," he said quietly. "He's been draining your accounts." The room spun. Ethan, my son, the boy who used to climb onto my lap with his toy trucks, who I'd taught to balance a checkbook, who I'd watched marry Rebecca with tears in my eyes. The man I'd trusted to handle my affairs when Elizabeth's illness consumed us both. My chest tightened, a sharp ache spreading like wildfire. "No," I whispered. "Not Ethan. He wouldn't. He couldn't. I'm so sorry, Bill." Michael said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've been digging into this since I got the real statements from the bank. Over the last 3 years, since Elizabeth passed, someone's been siphoning your funds. The retirement account, the investment portfolio, it's been a slow, deliberate bleed. Structured withdrawals, transfers to accounts you've never seen. The brokerage account is down to a fraction of what it was. There's maybe 100,000 left, if that." I leaned forward, my head in my hands, the polished oak floor blurring beneath me. 3 years. 3 years of Ethan sending me those quarterly reports, neat PDFs with charts and numbers that always looked so reassuring, stable, safe. I'd trusted them because I trusted him. "The reports," I said, my voice hoarse. "They always looked fine. Ethan sent them every quarter, told me the market was holding steady. They're doctored, Bill," Michael said, and I could hear the anger creeping into his tone. "Forged PDFs, designed to keep you in the dark. The real statements tell a different story. The money's been funneled into a shell company, something called Cascade Ventures LLC. I'm still tracing where it's gone from there, but it's not good." A memory flickered, sharp and painful. Ethan at my kitchen table, maybe a year ago, his laptop open, papers spread out. "Don't worry, Dad," he'd said, his smile so confident, so familiar. "The market's up and down, but I've got everything under control. You just focus on yourself." I'd nodded, grateful for his help, for the way he stepped in after Elizabeth's death, when the grief was so heavy I could barely think. Another memory, a property tax bill, larger than expected, that had worried me. Ethan waved it off. "Taken care of, Dad. I moved some funds from the portfolio to cover it. All part of the plan." The plan. Those words burned now, each one a twist of the knife. He hadn't been protecting me. He'd been building a lie, wrapping it in kindness, in concern, in the face of the son I loved. I remembered how he'd gently discouraged me from visiting the bank. "The new tellers are a hassle, Dad," he'd said. "They'll just confuse you with paperwork. Let me handle it." I'd trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. "Bill?" Michael's voice pulled me back. "Are you still there?" I forced a sound from my throat, a ragged yes. My hands were trembling, the phone slick in my grip. How could he do this? I asked, more to myself than to Michael. After everything. After Elizabeth. "I don't have an answer for that," Michael said, his voice soft but resolute. But I need you to listen to me, Bill. This is the most important part. You cannot let Ethan know you know. Not yet. You have to go to that dinner tonight. You have to smile, ask about, Lily, act like everything's normal. If he suspects you're onto him, he could move what's left of the money, hide it somewhere we'll never find. We need time to trace it, to build a case. From this moment, you're not just my friend, you're my client. And we're in this. Fight together. A fight. The word echoed in my chest, foreign and cold. I was a retired bank manager, a man who balanced ledgers, not waged wars. But as I sat there, the weight of Ethan's betrayal pressing down on me, something else stirred. A spark of clarity, the kind I used to feel when I spotted an error in a financial statement. A problem had been identified. The variables were unknown, the damage catastrophic, but I wasn't helpless. Not yet. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, like a building with its foundation cracked. I walked to the hall mirror and stared at my reflection. The man looking back was a stranger, eyes wide with shock, face pale, the lines around his mouth deeper than I remembered. My hand, still clutching the phone, trembled. I took a deep breath, forcing it past the ache in my chest. I had to put this man away. I had to become someone else. Someone who could walk into his son's house, kiss his granddaughter's forehead, and sit at a table bought with his stolen life, all while smiling like nothing was wrong. I understand, Michael, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. I'll go to dinner. The act starts now. I hung up the phone and stood there, the silence of the house pressing in like a living thing. I slipped on my coat, straightened the collar, and smoothed the lapels. Then I walked out into the cool Seattle evening, leaving the man I used to be behind in the empty house. The drive to Ethan's house felt like crossing into another world. Seattle's streets, usually so familiar with their drizzle-slicked pavement and glowing lights, seemed alien tonight. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale, as Michael's words echoed in my head. You cannot let him know you know. I was a retired bank manager, not an actor, but I had to play the part of a father who still believed in his son. The thought made my stomach churn, but I pushed it down, focusing on the rhythm of the windshield wipers, steady, controlled, like the man I needed to be. Michael's voice had been clear, almost military in its precision. This is a war, Bill, he'd said before I hung up. A quiet one, but a war all the same. Ethan thinks he's in control, and we need him to keep thinking that. If he gets spooked, he could cover his tracks, move what's left of your money offshore, destroy records. We need time to build a case, and you need to buy us that time. His words were a lifeline, pulling me out of the fog of betrayal. A war, I could do that. I'd spent 40 years spotting discrepancies in ledgers, untangling financial knots. This was just a bigger knot, a more painful one. I pulled into Ethan's neighborhood, where the houses weren't just homes, they were monuments to success. His place was the grandest, a sleek, modern villa with walls of glass and a manicured lawn that looked like it belonged in a magazine. As I parked in the circular driveway, the automatic gates slid open, silent and smooth, welcoming me into the heart of the lie. I took a deep breath, straightened my tie, Elizabeth's burgundy tie, and stepped out of the car. Smile, I told myself. Ask about Lily. Be the father he expects. Before I could even knock, the door swung open, and there was Ethan, his smile wide and polished. Dad, right on time, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. His grip was firm, almost possessive, and I forced myself not to flinch. He was wearing a tailored sweater that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. Good to see you. Ethan, I said, my voice steady, though it felt like a stranger's. I managed a smile, brittle but convincing, and stepped inside. Michael had warned me to expect this, but the reality hit harder than I'd imagined. He'd introduced me to someone who would help us fight this battle, a forensic accountant named Claire Thompson. She's the best, Michael had said, his voice carrying a rare note of admiration. She'll trace every dollar, every transaction like a bloodhound. But your job, Bill, is the hardest. You have to keep Ethan comfortable. Let him believe he's still pulling the strings. Arrogance makes people sloppy, and we need him sloppy. Claire. I hadn't met her yet, but Michael described her as sharp, relentless, with a mind that could unravel even the most tangled financial schemes. The thought of her digging through Ethan's lies gave me a flicker of hope, a spark to hold on to as I walked into this house built on my stolen savings. Michael had laid out the plan with the precision of a chess master. Claire will work in the shadows, he'd said. She'll map out where the money's gone, every transfer, every account. I'll handle the legal side, pulling original records from the banks, filing subpoenas if needed. But you, Bill, you're the front line. You're the one who has to walk into that dinner and act like the world hasn't just fallen apart. I nodded to myself, replaying his words as I hung my coat on the rack in Ethan's foyer. The plan was simple in theory, brutal in execution. I had to be the father Ethan expected. Proud, a little out of touch, grateful for his help with my finances. I had to let him believe his deception was airtight. Every word, every gesture had to be measured, like balancing a ledger down to the penny. One slip, and he might sense something was wrong. One slip, and the last of my life's work could vanish for good. I thought of Elizabeth, her gentle smile in that silver frame back home. She'd always believed in Ethan, even when he stumbled. When he dropped out of college for a semester, when his first business venture failed. "He's got a good heart, Bill," she'd say, her hand squeezing mine. Now, that good heart was bleeding me dry, and I had to pretend I didn't know. I had to sit at his table, laugh at his jokes, ask about Lily's soccer games, all while the truth burned a hole in my chest. But as I stood there, the weight of the betrayal pressing down, something else stirred inside me. The part of me that had spent decades analyzing numbers, spotting patterns, solving problems. Ethan had made a mistake. He'd underestimated me, thought I was too old, too trusting to notice. He was wrong. The retired bank manager in me was waking up, and he was ready to fight. Not with anger, not with tears, but with the cold, hard logic of a man who knew how to follow the money. "I can do this," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the hum of Ethan's house. I adjusted my tie one last time, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the living room, where the sound of laughter and clinking glasses waited. The war had begun, and I was ready to play my part. The glass doors of Ethan's villa glowed with warm light as I stepped inside, the air carrying the faint scent of expensive candles and roasted herbs. The foyer was a statement of wealth, polished marble floors, a modern chandelier dripping with crystal, a massive abstract painting dominating one wall. It was beautiful, impeccable, like something out of a design magazine. And every inch of it was a lie, paid for with the savings Elizabeth and I had scraped together over a lifetime. My savings, my life's work. The realization hit me like a physical blow, but I forced a smile, the kind I'd practiced in the car on the way over. "Act normal," Michael's voice echoed in my head. "Don't let him suspect a thing." Ethan led me into the living room, his hand still on my shoulder, guiding me like I was a guest in his world. Rebecca was there, gliding toward me in a sleek black dress, a pearl necklace gleaming at her throat. "Dad," she said, her voice smooth as silk, wrapping me in a quick, cool hug. "So good to see you." Her embrace felt rehearsed, like a performer hitting her mark. I could feel the sharp edges of her necklace against my chest, and the thought crept in unbidden. I paid for that. I pushed it down, nodding warmly. "You too, Rebecca," I said, my voice steady, though it tasted like ash in my mouth. "Where's Lily?" I asked, glancing around for my granddaughter. Her absence was a pang, a small mercy, and a quiet ache all at once. "Sleep over at a friend's," Ethan said, waving a hand dismissively. "You know how 12-year-olds are, always on the move." He flashed that easy smile of his, the one that used to make me proud, the one that now felt like a mask. I nodded, swallowing the disappointment. I wasn't sure I could have faced Lily's bright eyes tonight, not with what I knew. Ethan handed me a glass of sparkling water, the bubbles catching the light from the chandelier. "Come on, Dad. Let's sit. Dinner's almost ready." He gestured toward a white leather sofa that looked like it cost more than my car. I sank into it. The cushions too firm, too perfect. The living room opened to a wall of glass, revealing a sleek infinity pool and the twinkling lights of Seattle's skyline. It was a view that screamed success, ambition, everything I'd once hoped for Ethan. Now it screamed something else. Betrayal. Rebecca settled across from me, crossing her legs with practiced grace. "You look tired, Dad," she said, her eyes narrowing with a polished concern that didn't reach her smile. "Everything okay at home?" "Just the usual," I said, forcing a chuckle. "The garden's keeping me busy. Those roses Elizabeth planted, they're a lot of work." I let my voice trail off, playing the part of the aging widower, a little overwhelmed, a little out of touch. It was what they expected, and I needed them to keep expecting it. Ethan poured himself a glass of red wine, the bottle's label one I didn't recognize but knew was expensive. "You should hire a gardener, Dad," he said, leaning back in his chair. "No need to wear yourself out. You've earned a break." His tone was casual, but there was a weight to it, a subtle nudge to keep me passive, uninvolved. "Oh, I don't mind," I said, sipping my water to buy a moment. "Keeps me young." I smiled again, my face aching from the effort. Every word felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between the father I'd always been and the man who now knew the truth. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have hosted a corporate board meeting. A long glass table, plates arranged like works of art, a centerpiece of lilies that filled the air with their heavy scent. Rebecca talked about her latest interior design project, a boutique hotel downtown. Ethan chimed in about his new range.
Rover, how it handled like a dream. Each detail was a fresh stab. Every luxury, every casual mention of wealth, a reminder of what they'd taken from me. I nodded, murmured my congratulations, and cut into my steak, the knife gliding.
Through it like butter, bought with my money, I thought. But I kept my eyes on my plate. Halfway through the meal, Ethan leaned forward, his expression shifting to that careful, caring tone I'd come to recognize as his most dangerous weapon. "Dad," he said, setting down his fork. "I was looking over your quarterly reports the other day." He paused, letting the words settle, and I felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. "The market's been a bit shaky. I'm thinking we should move some of your funds, maybe from the growth portfolio to something safer like bonds. I just want to make sure you're protected." Protected. The word landed like a slap. He was offering to protect me from the very disaster he'd created, a disaster I was only just beginning to understand. It was a brilliant move, cloaked in concern, designed to tighten his grip on what little was left of my savings. I took a slow sip of water, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. "Act normal," Michael's voice whispered again. "Don't let him see." "That's thoughtful of you, son," I said, my voice quiet but even. "You've always been so good with this stuff. I trust you to handle it." I looked at him, meeting his eyes, and saw the faintest flicker of relief cross his face. His shoulders relaxed, just a fraction, and Rebecca's smile tightened, her fingers brushing the pearls at her neck. They believed me. They believed their lie was still safe. "You don't know how much that means, Dad," Ethan said, his voice warm, almost genuine. "I just want to take care of you, like you've always taken care of us." He reached for Rebecca's hand, and she nodded, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe, or triumph. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze. They talked about their plans, a summer trip to the Maldives, a kitchen remodel, private school options for Lily next year. Each word was another brick in the wall of their deception, another piece of my future they'd dismantled. And I sat there, nodding, smiling, playing the part of the proud, slightly clueless father who was just happy to be included. It was exhausting, like carrying a weight I couldn't put down. Every laugh, every bite of food felt like a betrayal of myself, but I kept going. I had to, for Elizabeth, for Lily, for the truth. When I finally said my goodbyes, Rebecca hugged me again, her perfume sharp and expensive. Ethan walked me to the door, his arm around my shoulders. "Drive safe, Dad," he said, his voice full of that easy charm. "We'll see you next week." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, forcing one last smile as I stepped into the cool night air. The gates closed behind me, and I slid into my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I drove a block before pulling over, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The weight of the evening pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I'd done it. I'd played the part. But the cost was a piece of my heart, the piece that still wanted to believe in my son. I closed my eyes, picturing Elizabeth's face in that silver frame. "I'm trying, Liz," I whispered. "I'm trying to make this right." The road ahead was dark, but I wasn't alone. Michael and Claire were out there, working in the shadows, building the case that would bring Ethan's lies crashing down. I just had to hold on, keep pretending until the moment was right. The war was far from over, but tonight, I'd won the first battle. The days after that dinner felt like living inside a stranger's life. My house, once a haven of familiar creaks and warm memories, now felt like a stage where every move had to be calculated. I'd wake up to the same routine, coffee in Elizabeth's favorite mug, pruning the roses she'd loved. But the weight of Ethan's betrayal hung over me like a shadow. I wasn't just Bill Harper, retired bank manager, anymore. I was a man at war, playing a role to protect what was left of my world. And yet, every time I passed Elizabeth's picture on the hall table, I'd pause, whispering, "I'm doing this for you, Liz. For us." It was a promise I couldn't break. Michael's office became my anchor, a fortress of logic in a world turned upside down. The place smelled of strong coffee and old leather, with shelves of legal books stretching to the ceiling like silent guardians. When I walked in the next morning, Michael was behind his mahogany desk, his face grim but focused, like a general plotting a campaign. He wasn't alone. A woman sat across from him, her posture straight, her dark hair cropped short. She didn't smile or offer pleasantries, just nodded when Michael introduced her. "Bill, this is Claire Thompson," he said. "The best forensic accountant I know. She's here to help us take Ethan down." Claire's eyes met mine, sharp and unyielding, like she could see straight through to the numbers behind my pain. She didn't waste words on sympathy, and I respected that. My life was a wreck, and she was here to analyze it, not coddle me. "We've started digging," she said, her voice calm but precise. "What Ethan's done isn't just theft, it's a calculated operation. Cascade Ventures LLC isn't just a shell company. It's the hub of a failing hotel project in Alaska, managed by your son-in-law, with Ethan pulling the strings." Alaska. The word landed like a stone. I remembered Ethan mentioning a big project up north, something about a luxury hotel. That would change the game. He'd been so excited, his eyes bright with ambition. I'd been proud, thinking he was building something real. Now I saw it for what it was, a black hole swallowing my life's savings. "How much?" I asked, my voice flat. "How much of my money is in that project?" Claire slid a chart across the desk, a web of lines and arrows that mapped the destruction of my financial life. "Over the last 3 years," she said, "we've traced nearly $2 million from your accounts to Cascade Ventures. From there, it's been funneled into construction costs, permits, and what looks like personal withdrawals labeled as consulting fees. The project's over budget, plagued by delays. They're desperate for cash, and your accounts have been their lifeline. I stared at the chart, my years of banking experience making the numbers scream. Every line was a choice Ethan had made, every arrow a betrayal. The house, the Range Rover, Rebecca's pearls, all pieces of a puzzle I'd been too trusting to see. "And the house?" I asked, my throat tight. "My house." "That's the key," Michael said, leaning forward. "It's your last major asset, the one thing they can't touch without your consent. They're banking on inheriting it, or worse, controlling it. We're going to use that to our advantage." His plan was cold, brilliant, and brutal. I was to leak the idea that I was considering selling the house and moving to a retirement community in Florida. A place with palm trees and no lawns to mow, no memories to haunt me. The news would spread through a friend, George, a retired accountant I'd known for decades, whose love of gossip was legendary. "Tell George over lunch," Michael said. "By dinner, Ethan will know. He'll panic, and when he does, he'll make a mistake." The plan felt like a betrayal of my own heart, using Elizabeth's home, our home, as bait. But Michael was right. Ethan's arrogance was his weakness, and we needed him to overplay his hand. Claire would keep digging, tracing every dollar, while Michael prepared the legal groundwork, subpoenas, bank records, anything to build an airtight case. My role was the hardest, to keep pretending, to be the father Ethan thought I was. A little confused, a little frail, completely in his control. I started small, planting the seeds of my performance. On Tuesday morning, I called Ethan at 10 o'clock, knowing he'd be in a meeting, knowing it would catch him off guard. "Dad?" he answered, a faint edge of annoyance in his voice. "Everything okay?" "Oh, sorry to bother you, son," I said, letting my voice waver, practiced and weary. "It's just, these insurance papers came in the mail. All this talk about beneficiaries and trusts. It's too much for me. Your mother used to handle this stuff." I let the words hang, planting the idea that I was overwhelmed, out of my depth. Ethan's tone softened, but I could hear the calculation behind it. "Don't worry, Dad," he said. "Just leave them on the counter. I'll swing by this afternoon and sort it out for you." "You're a lifesaver, Ethan," I said, the words bitter in my mouth. My head's not what it used to be. It was a lie, and it hurt like swallowing glass, but it was necessary. When he came by, I had a cup of his favorite coffee ready, black and strong. We sat at the kitchen table, and he flipped through the papers, explaining them in simple terms, like I was a child. I nodded, thanked him, played the part. As he left, I pulled my next move. "Oh, shoot," I said, patting my pockets with a feigned panic. "I must have left my wallet in your car last Friday. Getting forgetful, I guess." I forced a sheepish laugh. "It's fine, Dad," Ethan said, already halfway out the door. "I'll check for it. Just be more careful, okay?" He smiled, that charming smile, and I smiled back, my real wallet heavy in my back pocket. I'd just given myself an excuse to show up at his house unannounced, to keep him off balance. The main gambit came on Thursday, over lunch with George at our usual diner, a cozy spot with the best clam chowder in Seattle. We talked about old times, our grandkids, the aches and pains of getting older. It was so normal, so comfortable, that the lie I was about to tell felt like a betrayal of our friendship. But Michael's words rang in my ears. "This is a war." "You know, George," I said, stirring my iced tea, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "This house, since Elizabeth's gone, it's too much. The yard, the upkeep, it's wearing me out." George nodded, his eyes full of sympathy. "It's a lot for one person, Bill." "I've been thinking," I continued, letting my shoulders slump. "A friend moved to a retirement place in Florida. No maintenance, no worries, just sunshine and golf. I'd have to sell the house, liquidate everything, but maybe it's time for an easier life." I let the words sink in, watching George's eyes widen. This was news, big news, and I knew he couldn't keep it to himself. He promised he would, but we both knew better. I left the diner with a grim sense of satisfaction, mixed with the sour taste of using a friend. Claire's update came that afternoon, sent through Michael's secure email. Her findings were chilling. Cascade Ventures wasn't just a shell company. It was the primary investor in a hotel project in Anchorage, drowning in debt and construction delays. Ethan was listed as the financial manager. They weren't just spending my money. They were gambling it on a sinking ship, and they needed my house to keep it afloat. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Ethan to take the bait. The trap was set, and I was the bait. It felt strange, carrying this secret plan in my chest as I drove to Ethan's house again, the Seattle skyline a blur of lights against the evening drizzle. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, I was a mess of nerves and grief. I kept picturing Elizabeth's face, her gentle smile urging me to stay strong, to protect what we'd built together. I wasn't just fighting for my savings anymore. I was fighting for her memory, for Lily's future, for the truth. Michael's words echoed in my mind. Let him believe he's in control. I had to play the part of the trusting father one more time, even if it tore me apart. I'd prepared for this moment with the precision of a bank audit. Before leaving home, I slipped a small recording device, barely bigger than a dime, into the hollow base of Elizabeth's old pocket watch, a keepsake she'd loved. It sat on my mantel most days, but tonight it would be my silent witness. I adjusted it carefully, taping it in place, then tucked it into my jacket pocket. The plan was simple. Get Ethan talking, leave the room, and let the device capture what he'd never say to my face. Michael had been clear. We need proof of intent, Bill, he'd said. Something undeniable. This is your chance. When I pulled into Ethan's driveway, the glass villa glowed like a beacon, its wealth a stark contrast to the quiet simplicity of my own home. The gate slid open and I parked, my heart thudding. I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, Elizabeth's burgundy tie, and stepped out, the pocket watch heavy in my pocket. Smile, I told myself. Be the father he expects. Ethan greeted me at the door, his charm dialed up to full. Dad, you made it, he said, pulling me into a quick hug that felt more like a performance than affection. Rebecca was behind him, elegant in a cream-colored blouse, her pearl necklace catching the light. Good to see you, Dad, she said, her smile as polished as ever. I nodded, forcing warmth into my voice. You too, both of you. Lily was at another sleepover, and I felt that familiar pang of relief and loss. I wasn't sure I could have faced her tonight, not with what I was about to do. We moved to the living room, and I casually set the pocket watch on the coffee table, next to a stack of design magazines. It looked harmless, just a sentimental trinket from an old man. Ethan poured me a glass of sparkling water, and we made small talk. Lily's latest art project, the weather, my roses. But I could feel the tension building, like a storm gathering on the horizon. I waited for the right moment, then dropped the bait. George and I had lunch the other day, I said, stirring my drink, my voice light but tinged with weariness. We got to talking about the house. It's a lot to manage, you know? Since your mother's been gone, it feels so empty. I'm thinking maybe it's time to sell, move somewhere easier. Florida, maybe. One of those retirement places with no upkeep. Ethan's glass paused halfway to his lips. Rebecca's smile froze, just for a second, before she recovered. Sell the house? Ethan said, his voice a little too sharp. Dad, you can't be serious. That's your home, Mom's home. He leaned forward, his eyes searching mine, and I saw the panic flicker behind his charm. Oh, it's just an idea, I said, waving a hand, playing the part of the tired old man. The yard's too big, the stairs are getting harder. Florida. Sounds nice, Sunshine, no worries. I'm just kicking it around. I let my voice trail off, watching their faces. Ethan's jaw tightened, and Rebecca's fingers brushed her pearls, a nervous tick she couldn't hide. "That's a big decision, Dad," Rebecca said, her tone soft but urgent. "You should really think it through. We can help with the house. Hire a gardener, a handyman. You don't need to sell." Her words were laced with concern, but I heard the desperation underneath. They needed that house, not for me, but for their failing project in Alaska. I nodded, murmuring something vague about considering it, and then stood. "Let me grab some coffee," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "My head's a bit foggy. Tonight." I walked away, my steps slow, deliberate, leaving the pocket watch on the table. My heart pounded as I reached the kitchen, out of sight but close enough to hear. I turned on the faucet, letting the sound of running water mask my absence, and counted the seconds. It didn't take long. Ethan's voice came first, low and tense. "He can't sell the house, Rebecca. If he does, we're done. The Alaska project is bleeding cash, and the investors are breathing down my neck. We need that equity." Rebecca's voice was sharper, colder than I'd ever heard. "He won't sell," she hissed. "I'll make sure of it." "He's more confused than I thought. This Florida nonsense proves it. We need to act fast. The power of attorney isn't enough if he's hell-bent on selling. We need a conservatorship, Ethan. Full control. It's the only way to protect our interests. Protect our interests." The words cut deeper than I'd expected, slicing through the last shred of hope I'd held for my son. I stood there, gripping the counter, my knuckles white, as their voices painted a picture of calculated greed. Ethan's tone was frantic now. "What if he calls a realtor? We can't stop him without proof he's not competent." "Then we get proof," Rebecca said, her voice like ice. "I'll talk to Dr. Larson, get an evaluation. We'll make it airtight. He's not selling that house." The faucet was still running, but I barely heard it. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. They weren't just stealing from me. They were planning to strip me of my autonomy, to declare me unfit, all to save their sinking empire. I turned off the faucet, clattered a few cups for show, and walked back to the living room, a tray of coffee in my hands. They were silent now, their faces composed, but the air was thick with tension. "Sorry about that," I said, forcing a smile. "Got a bit distracted." I set the tray down, the pocket watch still sitting innocently on the table, its tiny lens capturing everything. They left soon after, promising to call to help with the house. The moment their car pulled away, I retrieved the device, my hands trembling as I slipped it back into my pocket. I drove home in silence, the weight of their words pressing down on me. When I got to my armchair, Elizabeth's thinking chair, she'd called it, I plugged the device into my phone. I pressed play. Their voices filled the room, clear and damning. Ethan's panic, Rebecca's cold calculation, and those words, "We need a conservatorship." My heart broke all over again, but beneath the pain, something else stirred. The truth was mine now, captured in a digital file. The trap had worked. The days after that night were a quiet kind of torment. I went through the motions, watering Elizabeth's roses, reading the morning paper, sipping coffee from her favorite mug, but it was like living in a house made of glass, fragile and ready to shatter. That recording, tucked away in my desk drawer, was a weight I carried everywhere. Ethan's voice, Rebecca's cold calculation, their plan to declare me incompetent. It played in my head like a song I couldn't shake. I'd look at Elizabeth's picture on the hall table, her smile frozen in time, and whisper, "How did it come to this, Liz?" I wasn't just fighting for my money anymore. I was fighting for us, for the life we'd built, for the promises we'd made to Lily. Michael's office was my refuge, a place where the chaos in my heart met the clarity of strategy. I sat across from him, the air thick with the smell of coffee and old books, as he laid out the next steps. Claire Thompson was there too, her laptop open, her eyes sharp as ever. She'd been working non-stop, tracing the money Ethan had siphoned, into Cascade Ventures LLC, mapping out the wreckage of my financial life. "We've got enough to bury him," Michael said, his voice steady but fierce. "The recording is gold, proof of intent to defraud you, to manipulate the court. But we're not done. Claire's still digging, and I'm pulling every bank. Record I can get my hands on." I nodded, my hands clasped tight to keep them from shaking. The engineer in me, the bank manager who'd spent decades balancing ledgers, appreciated the precision of their plan. But the father in me was breaking. Ethan wasn't just my son. He was the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the man I'd walked down the aisle with pride. How had he become this? I wanted to believe there was still good in him, somewhere beneath the greed. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice on that recording. "We need a conservatorship." It was a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, everything changed. I was back in Michael's office, going over my testimony for the inevitable legal battle, when his phone rang. He put it on speaker, and Claire's voice came through, different from her usual calm precision. There was a tremor in it, a quiet horror that made my stomach drop. "Michael, Bill," she said, pausing as if choosing her words carefully. "I was cross-referencing Elizabeth's estate documents just to be thorough. I found something worse. Worse." The word hung in the air, heavy and cold. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire took a breath. Elizabeth had a life insurance policy, a big one. $600,000 set up years ago for Lily's college education. It was meant to go into a trust, the Lily Harper Educational Fund. But I found a change of beneficiary form, filed just 2 weeks before Elizabeth passed away. It redirected the entire payout to Ethan's personal account. The room went silent. My breath caught in my throat, and the world seemed to tilt. Elizabeth. My Elizabeth, who'd fought so hard in those final weeks, her body frail from chemo, her mind clouded by painkillers. She'd poured her heart into that policy, a last gift to our granddaughter, a promise that Lily would have the future we'd dreamed for her, and Ethan had taken it. I felt a cold dread wash over me, heavier than anything I'd felt before. He stole from Lily?" I whispered, the words tasting like bile. "There's more," Claire said, her voice tight. I compared Elizabeth's signature on the form to dozens of others, checks, letters, her will. Her signature was always steady, elegant, even when she was sick. But this one, it's off. The slant of the E, the curve of the H, they're wrong. It's not just shaky, like you'd expect from someone ill. It's deliberate, like someone trying to mimic her hand. The implication hit me like a freight train. Ethan hadn't just stolen from me. He'd forged his dying mother's signature, taken her final act of love for her granddaughter and twisted it for his own gain. The room spun, and I gripped the armrests of my chair, my knuckles white. Michael stood and walked to the window, his back to me, his shoulders rigid. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he turned, his face was a mask of fury, the kind of anger that burns cold and deep. "Claire," he said, picking up his phone, his voice low and dangerous. "Send me a high-resolution scan of that signature. Now." He paused, then dialed another number. "This is Michael Sullivan. I need to speak to Rachel Cohen, the handwriting expert. Tell her it's urgent. We're looking at a potential forgery and I need her analysis yesterday." He hung up and looked at me, his eyes blazing. "This changes everything, Bill. Ethan didn't just betray you. He betrayed Elizabeth, Lily, everything you both stood for. But he also just handed us a weapon." I sat there, my mind a storm of grief and rage. The father in me wanted to scream, to demand answers from the son I'd raised. But the bank manager, the man who'd spent a lifetime chasing truth in numbers, saw the opportunity. A forged signature wasn't just a betrayal. It was evidence, hard and undeniable. Ethan had gone too far, and now we had him. The pain was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but it was joined by something new. The quiet, satisfying click of a plan falling into place. The war was about to turn. The courtroom was a world of polished wood and heavy silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel deliberate. I sat beside Michael, my hands resting on my knees, my back straight, but inside, I was a tangle of nerves and grief. At 67, I'd never imagined my life would lead me here, facing my own son across a legal battlefield. Ethan sat across the aisle with Rebecca, his face a mask of calm concern, playing the part of the devoted son saving his aging father from himself. It was a performance I'd once believed, but now it made my stomach turn. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel Elizabeth's absence like a hole in my heart. "This is for you, Liz," I thought, gripping the edge of my chair. "For you and Lily." Ethan's lawyer went first, a slick man with a silver mane and a voice smooth as velvet. He painted a picture of me that was both pitiful and damning, a grieving widower, lost in sorrow, making reckless decisions that threatened his own security. "Mr. Harper has shown signs of cognitive decline," he said, his tone dripping with sympathy. "His sudden plan to sell his family home and move to Florida is erratic, irrational, a clear sign he's unfit to manage his affairs." He called witnesses, two of Ethan's business associates, their faces unfamiliar to me, who claimed I'd been confused and disoriented at social events I'd never attended. Their words were lies, but they were delivered with such conviction that I could almost feel the courtroom believing them. Then came the psychological evaluation, a report from a Dr. Larson, who Ethan had arranged for me to meet briefly at a friendly coffee chat. The doctor's statement was a carefully worded attack, claiming I showed serious concerns about my ability to make sound decisions. It was a masterpiece of deception, designed to strip me of my autonomy, to turn me into a shadow of the man I was. I felt the humiliation burn in my chest, a hot flush spreading to my face. My own son telling a court I'd lost my mind, all to protect his theft. When it was Michael's turn, the room seemed to shift, like the air before a storm. He stood, not with anger, but with a quiet, deadly calm that made every head turn. "The petitioner has painted a picture of a man in decline," he said, his voice clear and steady. "But the court deserves the truth, and the truth is far different." He didn't call me to the stand. Instead, he called Dr. Margaret Ellis, the court-appointed psychiatrist, who'd evaluated me independently. Dr. Ellis took her seat, her expression neutral but confident. Michael walked her through her findings. "Dr. Ellis," he asked, "in your professional opinion, is Mr. Harper suffering from any cognitive impairment that would render him incapable of managing his own affairs?" She looked directly at the judge, her voice firm. "No, counselor. Mr. Harper is one of the most cognitively sound individuals I've evaluated. His memory is sharp, his reasoning impeccable. His financial background as a bank manager gives him a clear understanding of complex matters. In my opinion, his consideration of selling his home is a logical choice for simplifying his life in retirement, not a sign of incompetence." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I saw Ethan's shoulders stiffen, Rebecca's hand tighten on her purse. The first crack in their facade had appeared. Michael didn't pause. "Next, we call Claire Thompson," he announced. Claire walked to the stand, her presence quiet but commanding, like a librarian who knew every secret in her stacks. A large screen flickered to life behind her, and for the next 30 minutes, she dismantled Ethan's lies with surgical precision. She presented charts showing the steady drain from my accounts, $2.8 million funneled into Cascade Ventures LLC, then into the failing Alaska hotel project. She showed photos of Ethan's Range Rover, Rebecca's pearl necklace, their Maldives vacation, each tied to a major withdrawal from my savings. The numbers told a story of greed so clear, it silenced the room. Ethan's face was pale, his eyes fixed on the table. Rebecca stared straight ahead, her lips a thin line. Then came the recording. Michael played it, and my voice filled the courtroom, weary and confused, asking about selling the house. Then Ethan's voice, panicked. If he sells, we're done. The Alaska project needs that equity. And Rebecca, cold as steel. We need a conservatorship, full control. It's the only way. A gasp went through the room, soft but sharp, like a collective intake of breath. Ethan sank lower in his chair, his mask of concern crumbling. Rebecca's hand trembled, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Michael let the silence linger, then turned to the judge, his voice now carrying a righteous edge. Your Honor, what we have here is not a concerned son, but a calculated betrayal, and it goes deeper than Mr. Harper's accounts. He called Rachel Cohen, a handwriting expert, who presented the forged life insurance form. The signature of Elizabeth Harper, she said, is not genuine. It shows signs of careful imitation, not the hand of a dying woman, but of someone healthy, copying her writing. The courtroom felt like it had lost all air. Michael presented the final piece. Confirmation of the $600,000 insurance payout, deposited into Ethan's personal account weeks after Elizabeth's death. The Lily Harper Educational Fund, meant for my granddaughter, had never existed. Ethan had stolen his mother's last gift to her child. Rebecca's face froze, her eyes wide with shock, as if she hadn't known the full extent of his actions. Ethan didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. His head was bowed, his hands clenched, as the weight of his crimes crashed down. The judge, a woman with eyes that seemed to see through souls, spoke at last. Her voice was cold, unyielding. The petition for conservatorship is denied, she said, her gaze fixed on Ethan. This court has witnessed not a case of concern, but a predatory abuse of trust. Effective immediately, I order a freeze on all assets of Ethan and Rebecca Harper. This case, with its evidence of fraud and forgery, is referred to the district attorney for criminal investigation. The gavel fell, a sound like finality itself. The war was over. Spring came to Seattle with a soft warmth, the kind that makes you believe in new beginnings. I was kneeling in the garden, the rich smell of damp soil filling my lungs as I tended to Elizabeth's roses. The legal storm had passed, leaving behind a scarred but quieter world. The courtroom, with its polished wood and heavy truths, felt like a distant memory now, though the ache of Ethan's betrayal still lingered. A quiet bruise in my chest. I'd lost a son, not to death, but to a darkness I'd never seen coming. But in that loss, I'd found something else, something worth fighting for. The weeks after the trial were a blur of paperwork and decisions. Ethan and Rebecca were facing their consequences, a tangle of investigations and legal battles that no longer involved me. I'd stepped back, letting the law take its course, focusing instead on rebuilding what was left. My house, with its creaky floors and Elizabeth's roses, was still mine. The courts had frozen Ethan's assets, and Michael was working to recover what he could of my savings. It wouldn't be everything, but it was enough to keep me steady, to keep my promise to Elizabeth that I'd never fade away. I heard the back door slide open, and there was Lily, her sneakers crunching on the gravel path. At 12, she had her mother's sharp mind and Elizabeth's quiet kindness, a combination that made my heart swell and ache all at once. She sat on the grass beside me, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, her eyes bright with the curiosity of youth. "Grandpa," she said, "are the roses blooming yet?" "Almost," I said, brushing dirt from my hands. "Your grandma's roses always take their time, but they're worth the wait." I smiled at her, and she smiled back, a smile that reminded me so much of Elizabeth it hurt. I reached for a manila envelope I'd left on the garden bench, its edges crisp and new. "There's something I want you to see," I said, handing it to her. Lily opened it, pulling out the document inside. Her eyes scanned the words, and I watched her face change. Confusion, then understanding, then something deeper. "The Lily Harper Educational Fund," she read aloud, her voice soft. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "What is this?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "Your grandma," I began, my voice thick with emotion, "wanted to make sure you had everything you needed for college, for your dreams. She set this up for you, years ago. Things got complicated for a while. But Michael and we made it right. This is hers. This is for you." Lily's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She didn't say anything, just leaned forward and wrapped her arms around me, her grip fierce and warm. I held her close, my own eyes stinging as I looked, past the roses, past the old oak tree in the yard, to the clear blue sky stretching above us. In that moment, a quiet peace settled over me, the kind that comes from knowing you've done what's right. I'd lost Ethan to his greed, to a darkness I couldn't comprehend, but in fighting back, I'd saved something precious. Lily's future, Elizabeth's legacy, and a piece of myself I thought was gone. I thought about the journey that brought me here, the shock of Michael's call, the pain of Ethan's betrayal, the cold clarity of the courtroom. It wasn't about revenge, though the anger had burned bright at times. It was about reclamation, about standing up for the truth when it would have been easier to let it slip away. True strength, I'd learned, isn't loud. It's forged in silence, in the patient gathering of facts, in the courage to face a truth that breaks your heart. This story isn't just mine. It's a reminder for anyone who's ever trusted too deeply, who's felt the sting of betrayal from those they love most. It's a warning that greed can turn family into strangers, but it's also a promise that dignity once stolen can be reclaimed. Not with shouting or rage, but with patience, evidence, and the unwavering resolve to let the truth speak for itself. Justice isn't always a blaze of glory. Sometimes, it's the quiet weight of a courtroom gavel, the steady hand of a friend, the blooming of a rose you thought would never grow again. So share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let them know that even in the darkest moments, there's a way back to the light. And if you're still here, click on the next video to keep the journey going.